Got it. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming to this Holloway Poetry Series event. Tonight, we are honored to have with us Metta Sama, uh, who will read from her work, and she will be introduced by Berkeley's own John James. Prior to that, we'll have a short reading by Alex Walton, a graduate student poet in the PhD program, and Alex will be introduced by Jess Lazar. And with no more fanfare, I will turn it over to my co-host Jess Lazar. I'm Cecil Giskin, by the way. Jess Lazar and I curate the fall version of the Holloway Poetry Series. Thank you all for coming and braving the inconsistencies of Zoom. Jess.
Thanks, Cecil. All right. Drafts of W.H. Auden's poem, September 1st, 1939, perhaps famously show Auden's indecision about an edit of one line. "We must love one another or die," is the line. In drafts, he went back and forth between and or, so that the line would either be, "We must love one another and die," or "We must love one another or die." The implications of either decision obviously would have been endless. I wanted to introduce you to the work of Alex Walton by, one second, let me admit somebody, by using my somewhat privileged knowledge of his writing over the last decade to describe a similar moment in his process. One of my favorites of Alex's poems is called Iron, and it's in regular stanzas, it's quite long, and it ends like this. "You have a little blood in you. Are you not hot to the touch, used to being touched? Lie flat, you have a crease in you." So this somewhat sexy stanza has the iron that is hot running through our blood becoming the iron that irons, that is hot to the touch and that makes something that has a crease in it lie flat. I remember, and I wonder if Alex will remember, years ago when he was writing the poem, he couldn't decide in the final line between "lie flat, there is a crease in you," and "lie flat, you have a crease in you." The first option, "there is," might have offered a nice echo of Robert Frost's Mending Wall for those of us on whose brains its first line, "something there is that doesn't love a wall," is tattooed. But I feel I understand why he chose the second option. "You have a crease in you." And it has to do with the way the word crease comes between the two instances of the word you. You have a crease in you, such that the you that might otherwise be singular is divided for the speaker of the poem by a crease, and that crease cries out for an iron, maybe the iron that became the poem. So I know that this kind of attention to and awareness of one's options is in a way the most normal thing in the world for a poet. The difference I feel for Alex is that this awareness of possibilities functions as a kind of reading that is generative of poetic material itself, not as some poets do it, where the poem becomes a collection of options, but instead for Alex, the poem becomes a collection of deeply considered choices truly made, such that the poem almost always contains a kind of phantom or shadow poem that is the one it did not choose to be. In that sense, these poems admit loss in a way that I think is one of the secret ingredients of great literature. There are fireworks going on now in the background here where I am. I cannot emphasize enough my sense that Alex's ability to be always reading his writing as a way of writing it and choosing among the infinite options that must spring to his mind gives his poems a unique sense of urgency that does not come from content, but is a kind of formal technique, so that at every moment one must listen, and at every moment one must, at the expense of so many lines, get to the next line. To me, this is a poetry of fearlessness, a poetry that moves as a kind of trust fall. I hope you will close your eyes and allow yourself to go with it. Please welcome Alex Walton.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate that. And thanks to Metta for letting me join you, and to Cecil also for curating the fall series. I luckily I think you won't really have to close your eyes because I'm going to point you out the window. It seemed to me that one of the pleasures of being in the Mod 5 room for the Holloway readings is always the ability to stare out the window as the sun set. So I thought that maybe I would just point the camera out the window. There's enough light for that left, I think. So.
Ooh.
Or enough for a silhouette. I'm not going to read for long. I'm mostly just going to read from a little section from a piece of a longer poem called "Like Ending," and a few little bits and pieces to lead up to that. I haven't prepared any impromptu banter, so I'm just going to read straight through. I hope that's okay. I'm going to read for about 8 minutes. Two people. One person thinking of themselves importantly as one, maybe instead one person thinking of themselves importantly as one of many. Pigs. Separated from the structure of personality, a hectic unrest touched them on the shoulder to tell them about the spirits entered into them. Now, at this new time in my life, I recognize the effects and the need for redemption, just standing there, letting the beer slosh out on its own without looking, the last object in care of itself. I don't think they could bear the thought that this was all created merely for its potential relevance to the interests and the passions, but then at the absolute pit, at the water with the devils in the pigs and the devils not able to exit for the cost of self, you start to hear the songs again and don't desire calm stability, whose own discovery was consequent on being in the wave as it passed on by, the way in which the hesitations and reservations had been humanized. When they heard what had been done, they went out to the city to see the perfection of theory, the perfection of pigs in the water in their later life when I entered them through understanding. What pigs eat I sow, unconscious, self-forgetful, prideful, prided, forgotten, and slept. You are with me, but I have pissed off. The heavens are not the less constant because they move continually one and the same way. The earth is not the more constant because it lies still continually. The swine were suggestible. They could be told the very power and truth of Marxism, the taste of virtuous documents, harsh and sour. Harsh and sour. The very power and truth of Marxism consists in the fact that it has driven the cloud in our dreams into a very hard place, against which it is powerless not to become dense. The power and the verity of a maxim inheres in the facts, of which it is not the figuration, and have no connection to the happy spheres with which it lacks relation. I am the owner of this funnel, whose maximum capacity, as a matter of principle, can neither in verity or by the power of poetry be spoken of convincingly. The working day. This is from a very short-lived project to try and versify parts of Capital Volume 1. While in each individual workshop it enforces uniformity, regularity, order, and economy, the result of the immense impetus given to technical improvement by the limitation of the working day and its regulation is to increase the anarchy and proneness to catastrophe of this production as a whole, and digging upward from the whole in its intensity and the competition of the worker with machinery. Come live with me and expand your skill set transparently, and that balloon is withered up the wall, a blackened point, a tuft flaming from a picnic quilt of unreal cotton. Quote, they change their jobs as often as their shirts are changed beneath them. Each carries one to work or to the market under it, apt to fill the bubble's aptitude, rosy, rising on the wind like sweat, lost to any skin but general. As in the cheery view out of the drop of dew, congealed on earth, but not without a way into the sun to cast its glory forth, worthlessly, a symbol of worth, or what is like worth, value. Besides, one sentence, when pronounced aloud by strong-lunged criers, fills the listening crowd, breaks into many, for it strikes them all. And anyway, I am one of those who cannot enjoy polyphony and popish harmony inside of poverty and those made dead or alive for property. Like ending. The wealth of society, so it appears, a collection of wares, memories, baby foods, tupper art, sealed imperfectly, like a tense which can be emptied privily into times past, wisterily. Where were you when the minor statements played upon the grand, moved the world to their end, although not its? Hope is a material condition, only kidding. For now, the possibilities expressed in matter are playing doh, which is the word dead, with certain changes rung upon the dumbbell, determined like the shape of a house by the shape of the other houses and economic spikes you wear to the mall, the very stores stocking them, and out again. It feels good in the sun not to lean on thinking, the surface that is concrete possibility, that being rubble, speaking gravel and gray mud, is making tangible the roll of good temptations. It disappointeth the devices of the crafty used to capture smarts, cats, pranks, quantities, qualities, creep. Here the mouse's brick against the cat, pictures being thrown, a hiccup of that special juice blood is, as Mephistopheles reminds us. This reminds us of the man who, when he wanted to sell his house, carried about with him one of the bricks as a sample. He carried a brick of it about as a specimen. He tossed it in his bag, the brick, as an example. He just tossed the brick in the back of his truck to show others, if he was out trucking around away from home. He just threw it in there as an example, one of the bricks of his house, just chucked it in there, not in the back, but through the window, which, as history tells us, was already open or had been opened. So when he tossed that thing, the brick, it went through easily and lay there as an example to the others, on the passenger side, on the right side of mystery. They sang Te Deum and excited loathing with a hurdy-gurdy, a portative organ, and an undergirding blur. After math comes history, then history too. Self-reliant like a cat, eye marble on a sloped-up hill, self-moving like a trike stumbled over in the night, bathed in extinguishing fire, quenched in the water pissed from the forge, I did not remember or forgot. In any circuitous figure like a watch-faced asp, wishes with wishful content come slashing in, is it snow turning to rain or nothing? Arid sonority aiding solemnity, to recognize division where unity is it the requirement of opposition to put dirt down where there will be a row, not a block of potatoes who wonder what she means? 3 standard stoppages, a meter, a water meter, and a yard, a side yard, in which it ticks. Wreaths of chainwork, illicit white pinks, sticky labels infelicitous, clucking about spring in undisciplined panting, finally infelicitous. The categories are news, politics, and rock, where syntax is usually concerned with topics such as government, agreement, and the flavorability of gum. In the text of Locke, the legion corruptions have been fed through themselves. Searching Greeks why study? Across Afghanistan, landlords are waiving rent in ways unthought of here. Pictures are just a few of the flags they were left holding, trimmed from the bag from which Lord West had argently bargled. Men's tongues' ends have heresies upon them placed in the shapes of cliffs, and the notes they took upon them, walking the O altitudo to its end, whereupon you strolled the bullet, history, bullet, literature, bullet, ideology, a carrot for the rabbit, for the dog behind it. Thus came too close, history, means, tongue, ends. Thanks, that's it.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Alex. And thank you, Jess. I neglected to state that this reading is a co-sponsored event with Kelsey Street Press, our friends at Kelsey Street. And so before John James introduces Metta Sama, M.G. Dufresne, an editor at Kelsey Street, is going to say a few words about the press and its relationship with Metta Sama. So, MG.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Cecil and the folks at the Holloway series for inviting Kelsey Street Press to co-sponsor this event. I'm MG Dufresne. I'm a member of Kelsey Street Press, and I helped acquire and co-edit Metta Sama's amazing book, Swing at Your Own Risk, alongside Hazel White. To quote Tim Bajes, these poems are hungered, sensual, thicketed with image, and nailed into history. Sama's poems are visionary manifestos of the body, boiled in Black woman bloodline. In recent months, I found myself going back to Metta's incredible book again and again. In her poem, A Very, Very Abbreviated Brief History of Whiteness, a powerful litany ensues. It's eviscerating, forces one to sit with the discomfort, forces one to become more human. 50 Shades of White, number 7, is my favorite line in that poem. There are only two kinds of people in the world, victors and slaves. The word losers precedes the word slaves, existing as a strike through, a penetration of the page, something widely feared as a possible unpleasant or dangerous occurrence, a specter. Much like this moment where issues of systemic racism and the historic brutality inflicted upon Black folks has propelled public consciousness and conversation, serves as witness and archive to a widened lens of racial injustice we are experiencing in this moment. Swing at Your Own Risk reiterates in through its experiments in form, language, assonance, discomfort, and beauty to attest that this new widened lens has merely widened for those of us whom are not Black. Thank you, Metta, for letting Kelsey Street publish this immediate, stunning book. I'm so your fan, and your book has just gotten me through the last several months. It's so fierce and heartbreaking and forces me and folks who have read the book to really sit and think about the discomfort of race and naming and owning. So thank you so much for this work.
Thank you, MG, and thank you, Kelsey Street, and John James.
Thank you, Cecil. Thank you, MJ, for that introduction to my introduction, but it was fantastic, and I hope I'm not repeating too much of the same ground that you've gone over. And thank you, Alex, for those wonderful poems as well. They're super smart, and I loved hearing them. So, and Jess, I can't speak as beautifully and extemporaneously as you, so I'm going to read for my introduction, but hopefully it can be at least half articulate as yours. But Metta, I'm very excited to be able to introduce you. So without further ado, I will begin. At once tender, intimate, and brimming with history's latent rage, Metta Sama's Swing at Your Own Risk conjures a poetics of swing, whereby the formal dynamism of her verse narrowly contains the antinomic tension inherent to her themes. The polysemous nature of language, of embodiment, of gendered and racialized violence, but also of motherhood, miscarriage, care, and sex. Each poem is a rhetorical coup, a reinscription of the multifarious discourses that both generate and oppress the identities of their speakers, whose subversive application of familiar language, its ambiguities, etymologies, and puns, marks the work as undeniably liberatory. In one poem, for instance, Escrava Anastasia speaks, violence, liberation, and tenderness commingle in the voice of a Brazilian saint whose speech act itself indicates that she's been quite literally unmuzzled. In Brazilian folklore, Escrava Anastasia is a slave, forced to wear a metal mask for, in most versions of the tale, resisting sexual violence. Yet her language is less concerned with fetters than with family. Her gaze intertwines the demands of motherhood and erotic desire, positing the female body as a site of pleasure, creativity, procreation, and sustenance. What lingers beneath this dress, she states, slips, flowers, rises, floats, parades, pantomimes, drafts, designs. And later, she commands, slide beneath this dress, cling to my leg, child, link fingers, lock it, love. Grammar is multivalent. Nouns become verbs and vice versa, indicating the interdependence of wants and tasks and the identic demands that meet them out. But the body is also a resource whose care, sex, and labor remain subject to profit's extractive gaze. Anastasia exists to be covered, hunt and herd. This remains true in the following poem, whose density contrasts the visual and emotive expanse of the Anastasia piece, which bursts jubilantly across the negative space of the page. Rather, this piece, sharecropper Rosa Ingram convicted in the murder of Georgian farmer 1948, visually contrasts to generate a rhetorical closeness to the subject, here treated in the second person, which extends to an evocation of sympathy. Rosa, she writes, I strain my ears to glimpse your blood, emboldened and racing, racing. Other pieces turn to more blatantly political subject matter, critiquing not only the divisive rhetoric of our own politics, but the impossibility of the utopia on which such argumentation rests. In utopia, no one will feel impact, she writes. No economic downturn, no gender bias, no racial disharmony. Dear complainers, you're already, poof, dead. This is utopia, after all. As it has always been, utopia is both a good place and a no place, revealing its futility for political praxis. And yet, such futility does not foreclose possibility. Just as the book's pendulum swings toward despair, its rhetoric turns, unveiling the potential for new modes of thought, new forms of history and its freighted mediation. Swinging, then, from one rhetorical and aesthetic pole to the next, and trenchantly mobilizing this kinesis to imagine a freer futurity, swing at your own risk models the comprehensive, if seemingly paradoxical thinking necessary to move beyond such fraught times as our own. These poems have much to teach us, if, tonight, we are willing to hear. Please join me in welcoming Metta Sama.
Thank you. This is a night of introductions. This is like the reading to beat all readings. I've never seen so many introductions, and I really love them all. Thank you so much to Jess for your introduction of Alex's work and Alex for your poems. You know, like John said, they are very smart, but also I think very vulnerable, you know, like just and funny as well. So it's very exciting to hear that work. Thank you so much, MG, for your introduction to my work. I think we just kind of fangirl off of each other. I'm a huge fan of your work as well, so it's nice to hear you talk about my work. And John, honestly, publish that thing. That's a book review. And really, really just quite wonderful. You know, one of the things that I was thinking about with this book, you know, just in terms of structure, was that I did want the poems to kind of swing from one subject to the next to the next. In some ways to kind of think through intersectionality, and other ways for me to kind of think about what happens, I think, particularly to Black writers and to Latinx writers when we do have poems that address Blackness or address, being Latinx, that people kind of forget all the other poems in the book. It's just kind of like, oh, here's this poet who's just writing about being Black, and so in some ways I wanted the structure of the text to deny people that. And so, John, I really appreciate that you saw all of that you picked up on all of those different themes in the book. And when I do a reading from this book, I'm always kind of torn. Do I honor the swing in the book or do I do something else? But because we are in the climate that we're in, for me, it feels like we're always in this climate. But because we're in this climate that we're in, I decided to not swing with the book, to do what I just said I wasn't going to do, which is just to read poems that are about racial identity, because it's really kind of what I'm thinking about a lot right now. I'm living in North Carolina, which is one of these strange swing states. And it's just it's hardly ever a good time to be in the South, but this is definitely not a good time to be in the South. But I am going to swing between my first full-length collection of poems and Swing at Your Own Risk, in part because I think it's very important for us to recognize that even though we're in a moment that is isolated, it's unique, it's new, it's not that new. We've been doing this for a long time and writing about it for a long time and fighting it for a very long time. So I'm going to start with a couple of poems from south of here, and then I'm going to go to Swing at Your Own Risk and come back and go back. So I'm going to start with this poem called Chattanooga Times, July 24th, 1963, which is a poem that I wrote in part to ask for forgiveness for dissing my parents. When I was a child, my dad used to hold these Black history classes in our living room, and I really resented those lessons because I kind of felt like that was his history and my mom's history, their stories, and I just wanted to live my own relationship with race. But every year on his birthday, he would take me to the library to read this newspaper article about him. And so this is kind of my letting him know, like, I heard you, and as an adult who came to appreciate those lessons, those Black history lessons, came to really think through where we were living in the South, in Chattanooga, and how it wasn't really that long ago. Chattanooga Times, July 24th, 1963. On his 16th birthday, he caught a bullet in his left shoulder, stealing Cokes from a corner grocery. The owner, another white guy, another diminishing white town. The town losing itself, resisting possibilities. Sunny day rains, scarlet begonias thrashing in dirt, and boys stealing hot Cokes. The Cokes fizz-free, the Cokes for whites only. Coca-Cola calls my father by name, Sunny. Sunny with the sunshine smile. The smile even charms clouds. Sunny who can't remember what the white man looked like, where the bullet entered, but how it burned him awake. Invisible boy no longer. Shards of glass swim furiously, frantically, in soda and dust. So, I guess I was a very rebellious teenager, or a very rebellious kid, but very quietly rebellious. I'm a rebellious adult, like whatever. Michael McDermott, I see you laughing over there. Hi. But, I was very quietly rebellious. I was actually very docile. If you ask my parents who I was as a young person, they'll tell you that I was very docile. But I was very rebellious behind the scenes. And so one of the things that, I just always enjoyed doing was surrounding myself with people who would be considered bad seeds, bad people. And so this is a poem about one of those persons, who in some ways made me think a lot about my dad, but 20 years later, kind of dealing with the same history in the same place, but a little differently. So one person who escaped going to jail, my dad, and this person who did not. Marty Joe. You loved her too much to attend her funeral, knocked over the first old lady you saw, snatched her faithful handbag and hijacked a parked Chevy, rusted and locked down like you. You phoned from the cop corner, updated me on your whereabouts, your voice like dogwood blossoms falling on a wet sidewalk. You promised you'd be back in jail soon, back to 1 call a week, 2 hours of TV time, 3 hours for meal, 4 for games and exercise, countless hours, reflection hours, memory hours, longing hours, hours of desire for more than numbers identifying you, 15 numbers obscuring you, forgetting all about time. Losing your senses is a cosmic loss. Lost time, unrecordable time, seemingly avoidable time. Like the time my own father had to beg his mother to give him back time, had to promise to never take his lifetime for granted. But you've got jokes of numbers on hold, waiting in the wings, like a love who doesn't close her doors, the love of possibilities. First kiss, first carjack, first midnight walk, first fuck. But first things first, you had to mug a woman, steal a car, get yourself arrested for assault and theft, the third strike. And then the possibilities, 1 call a week, 1 hour, 1 voice, 1 love, and the smoke of a past clogged with teenage love. It's been nearly 20 years since our knees first touched. Back then I was 13 and desperate for an interlude, for the backbreaking kind of love that halts time, the kind of time I thought my father owned, that noun time, that money time, the kind of time my mother sang through secrets, time too short for lost love, baby. Don't you see, I was the death flower with an orchid in my ear. You could have been anyone at risk, but you wrapped a broken bicycle chain around my ring finger, made cosmic promises of love on the rocks, stellar reconciliations. We were without history then, broken and drunk, a redundancy of stolen cars, small-time crimes, petty drugs, and more hickeys than I could hide. But then you sold me to your uncle, promised me to sell me for cigarettes, kidnapped me first in real time, then dream time. No time like the present, baby, but the past, a future of empty beer cans, raised hands, painful kisses, fractures, racing ourselves. The foolishness of youth, of numbers burned too deep in the heart. Every year like clockwork, you woke, nightmaring water's lack, sweated through early morning birds, winter's brewed memories. And years later, I would describe facial features and hand ticks, the aura of despair, phone calls. I'm no longer the girl you remember, can't save you from your blood memories, not the girl to protect you from the coffin holding your aunt, the last woman bound to you by blood, leaving you desperately and utterly alone. So I'm going to move over to Swing at Your Own Risk. This beautiful book published by Kelsey, this is it, with this amazing cover by Michaela Pilar Brown. And I probably won't talk between poems anymore, I'm just gonna go. Ink, Spirit, Coffin. Tattoos are charms to protect us from what we fear the most. He has a bullet on his chest, bare-knuckled bull. He has a rush of razor. He has a rising sign, ink, a sigh rising has ink. He has a bullet on his cross, a cross on his rib, a hand on his heart, on his mouth, on his chest, a bullet on the brain. Time is a tense. The tense is past. His back is past. In his back, a black man's story, a black man's story, a black man's lifeline atop a black man's atop more black men's lives than his back should handle. He has a bullet on his chest, an amulet inked on his chest, a coffin front in his mind, sign, cross, ink. His chest is iconic, a coffin, a promise, a black man timed out, cloaked, a centuries-old clock ticking around his neck. Sharecropper Rosa Ingram, convicted in the murder of Georgian farmer, 1948. You, quiet, haint, prick your ring finger on stubborn cotton, or you, a weapon, silver, slicing cane, flickering in night, an insect floating, charged, wired, your lone rage revved, the rumbling in your children's bellies, piercing engines, clamoring through cotton fields, tone-deaf mantras forcing you from sleep, to sharecropper, to slow pay or no pay. Rosa, I strain my ears to glimpse your blood, emboldened and racing, racing. South of here. I'm listening for lungs evaporating under coal flecks, locust blossoms darkening, moons opening their mouths to the lull of men's tracks. I'm listening for the clutter of white faces blacker than March ash buds, for compassion, the imperceptible rust in the throat, listening for mine shaft rolls, the sun black with grief, blocked by black clouds, the inconspicuous refusal of the cosmos. I'm listening for light, but there is no light here. The miners can't escape their darkness, almost white when they enter the grottos, can't escape their bodies black under the blocked sun. How long will the light refuse them? Who will wash the black from the moon, from the mouths of caves? Who will wash the willows drenched in black? Okay, I'm going to talk for just a second because all of you may not be poets. So I'm going to read a poem. It's in a form called a ghazal. And a ghazal is written in couplets, which is 2-line stanzas. And the stanzas, the 2-line stanzas are supposed to, in some ways, be a little bit independent from each other, like little microcosms. And the thing that connects them is the final word on the line. It's supposed to be the same word on the line. Which is considered pearls in a string. And then you're supposed to call upon yourself at the end, I think, to claim the poem, to claim this microcosm, to make it your world. That's how I like to think about it anyway. I think it's charming. But you're supposed to call upon yourself. And at the time that I wrote this poem, I was going by the name Jade. So you'll hear Jaded at the end of the poem. Sign, signifier, signify, signified, an American African ghazal. I've heard death is a white man in black tie, a man captive in a trick of black. I hear myth, an earthworm moving an inch at a time, urging black earth aside. Elms in winter displace heat, turn black as damaged snow. In theaters before curtains release and withdraw from black, music lingers, intactly absent. Silence. Exercise patience. How does black myth survive? I hear a black man in red face, red stripes slashing through hair is death. Black mothers in kitchens seduce flour into loaves of bread, and men, black as coal, squeeze the necks of cotton stalks, anticipate struggle, create black gospel, black blues, black jazz, hear music's possibilities. Unrelenting black whips damage myth their beaten backs. In Europe, the Black Plague created Black deaths 200 years prior to Shakespeare's Othello. The Black Moor strangled his wife. Prior to the introduction of Black comedy. Before the stock market collapsed in '87, brokers held Monday until it too could become Black. Waiting around for another invention, Mel lost his innocence to Black. Then Black sex, Black satire, Black ice. Too clever for this setup? Soon, dawn will erupt, precise, breathtaking, the un of Black. And here we linger in Black images, repeating phrases as if they are truth, as if the structural design of words hold Black like fear. The myths fall in on themselves, but how we hunt for the blackest diamonds, the blackest metaphor. Strangers live resilient under interstate overpasses, Black as exhaust in valleys of ash buds, heavy as rain clouds, infinite as nebula. On the corner, a Black man contains himself in wilting dust particles, jaded as tossed napkins, spare change, coffee, crows. Okay, I'm gonna do 2 more pieces. One is all the bad news that you hear about violence, police violence. And I always like to kind of say, if you need to step away and care for yourself, care for your heart, care for your psyche, please do so. It's almost 11 o'clock here on the East Coast. Who wants to go to bed with this stuff in their head? So definitely take care of yourself. And then I'm going to read one poem after that. Fists versus guns versus knives versus guns versus mouthy mouths versus guns versus cell phones versus guns versus keys versus guns. A very brief history of police killings in the US, beginning with Bloody Christmas and ending with The Counted. And The Counted, for those of you who don't know, was the Guardian, the newspaper The Guardian, counted all of the unarmed citizens in the US for a year who were killed by the police. They kept a daily count. Daniel Rodella, a 23-year-old, 114-pound meter reader for the Los Angeles Gas Company, resisted arrest. So the officers beat him mercilessly in front of his family, then handcuffed and dragged him by his hair into the police car. From his home, they drove to Elysian Park, where they savagely beat him with a flexible instrument, fracturing facial bones and throwing his nose out of place. Rodella later testified that while feigning unconsciousness, he heard one officer say to another, "You'd better make your report good," that he resisted arrest and assaulted you with a flower pot or something. And that's regarding the Bloody Christmas of 1951 that was written by Cecilia Rasmussen. In 1977, Joe Campos Torres had been arrested at a Houston bar for disorderly conduct. Police officers took Torres to a spot called The Hole next to Buffalo Bayou and beat him. His body was found days later, from the Houston Chronicle. Two plastic surgeons testifying as expert witnesses said yesterday that a 66-year-old Bronx woman could have continued to slash at police officers who were trying to subdue her, even after a shotgun blast had torn away part of her hand that held a knife. The doctors testified on behalf of Stephen Sullivan, 43, a police officer on trial for manslaughter in the death of Eleanor Bumpus. She was shot in the right hand and chest by Officer Sullivan during an eviction proceeding on October 28, 1984. Written by Frank J. Priol. The 25th anniversary of a massive police operation in 1985 in Philadelphia that culminated in the helicopter bombing of the headquarters of a radical group known as MOVE. The fire from the attack killed 6 adults and 5 children and destroyed 65 homes in an entire neighborhood. Despite the 2 grand jury investigations and a commission finding that top officials were grossly negligent, no one from city government was criminally charged, from Juan Gonzalez. And this is from a television series that came out in the late 90s. You have to understand our lives are threatened every day. Cop. I guess that makes us brothers, Dwayne Wayne. A 27-year-old Cincinnati police officer spots the suspect as he runs into a dark alley. As a police car approaches, his camera rolling, the officer runs toward the alley and almost immediately a shot rings out. A single bullet fired from the officer's gun pierces the suspect's heart. He's pronounced dead at 3:02 a.m. on April 7th, 2001. The officer later tells investigators he thought the suspect was reaching for a gun, but no gun was ever found. By dawn, the identity of the suspect comes to light. The man was 19 years old, a young father with an infant son. The man's name was Timothy Thomas, written by John Larson. A woman who lost her premature baby a day after she was thrown in jail is suing the police department and 2 arresting officers who repeatedly ignored her pleas for medical help. A police videotape released Tuesday shows Sophia Salva telling officers numerous times last February 5th, 2007, that she was pregnant, bleeding, and needed to go to a hospital. After the 9th request, the tape shows a female officer asked, "How is that my problem?" That's from the AP. On 16 May 2010, 7-year-old Ayanna Stanley Jones was shot dead by Officer Joseph Weekly in the middle of the night as she slept on a sofa inside her home on the east side of Detroit. Her grandmother, Myrtilla Jones, was close by. The home was the target of a midnight SWAT-style operation designed to arrest her uncle, who was living in the apartment upstairs and was the main suspect in the murder of a teenager a couple days before. Weekly was the first officer to enter the home, seconds after a flashbang grenade, a war device created by the British SAS in the 1960s to disorient with a blinding flash and a temporarily deafening noise, was lobbed into it. Outside, a reality television crew filmed the event for A&E, written by Rose Hackman. A man fatally shot by a Seattle police officer after being ordered to drop a knife often had difficulty hearing and understanding what was said to him, say people who knew him. John T. Williams, 50, was killed by Officer Ian Burke Monday afternoon, September 1st, 2010. Burke saw Williams with a knife and repeatedly ordered him to drop it just before the shooting, police said, written by Linda M. Vapes. How can you justify 7 shots, several in the back, of an unarmed woman in a car? Patricia Cook's brother, John Wigler, said outside of court. And on the night of December 21st, 2013, a misunderstanding with his girlfriend spun Mahi Beats' Good Blanket into a destructive fit, smashing windows and doors and knocking over the family's Christmas tree. Melissa and Wilbur Good Blanket feared he would hurt himself, so they called 911. The law enforcement response that followed would leave their son lifeless on the floor of their Clinton home, riddled with gunshots, written by Jennifer Palmer. Video released by Cleveland Police on Wednesday shows that officers shot a 12-year-old boy, Tamir Rice, in a park on Saturday, November 22nd, 2014, 1.5 to 2 seconds after police drove into the park and confronted the child, Deputy Chief Edward Tomba said, written by Tom McCarthy. 24 states have passed at least 40 measures addressing such things as officer-worn cameras, training about racial bias, independent investigations when police use force, and new limits on the flow of surplus military equipment to local law enforcement agencies, according to an analysis by the Associated Press. Far more proposals have stalled or failed, the review found, and few states have done anything to change their laws on when police are justified to use deadly force, written by David A. Lieb in 2015. In fact, in this country, we raise all of our children on one form of violence or another. And so my question is not, why did you walk into that violence? My question is, where does my love come from that I walk through male violence to find it? That's written by Lydia Yuknevich. In 2016, police killed 1,093 citizens. And I'm going to end with this poem called Give Your Hands to Struggle, which is a song by the it's a song by Sweet Honey in the Rock. Give your hands to struggle, Sweet Honey in the Rock, after the urban bushwomen. They say the heart is a fist, but I've cut open a pig's chest, cracked a frog's rib cage, and touched each of their hearts with my whole palm, placed a scalpel in my hand, cut into fat to find hidden veins. Love, I've touched a human heart. Behind the animal skin, the heart is not a fist. The dancer stands wide-legged, hands closed, fingers digging tunnels into palms, chest pressing into a world we all imagine to be closed against her. She loosens her fingers, a canticle rising in her palms, pain inevitable. She throws her weight into an invisible wall, bounces back, screams, and runs, chest out, into the wall again. Bernice Reagan sings, Give Your Hands to Struggle. As an infant, I slept with my fist pressed into my ears. Now my palms reach towards love. The dancers leap, their fist shadow the walls, hands closed, then opened, closed, then opened, their mouths too, fisted before wailing, the words unfisted on their tongues. Even in resistance, love, the hands are fist, open, before closing and raised. Thank you again to Cecil for the invitation to come here and read. I really do appreciate it, and thank you all for coming out and coming to the right Zoom room. I really, really appreciate seeing you all, seeing your names. If I can't see you, at least I can see your names. So yeah, thank you so much.
And thank you, Metta. Thank you for that astounding, somewhat sobering reading, joyful reading, with the close in particular. And thank you, MG, for your introduction. Thank you to Jess for shepherding us through the Zoom chaos, and thank all of you in the audience who made this evening possible. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for listening. This is important stuff.